So let me call us to order and thank you all for coming. My name is Rob Manuel, and I'm the president at DePaul. And there's a lot of events like this I get to do, but these events about Catholicism, about the mission of the school that we run, are really the most important and often illuminating for me. I'm surprised, or not, maybe not surprised, but when I walked around the room, I heard there's an awful lot of connections to our new Pope, including people who played tennis with him in high school, maybe a relative that's around. I want to tell you my connection first. Pope Leo has gotten me out of two major jams in my life already. Last year, May, I had to testify before Congress in the anti-Semitism hearings, which was one of the worst experiences, filled with desolation that I could ever imagine. The day we went in to testify was the conclave. The day after, they appointed a pope from Chicago, and so 0 people cared about what the president from Chicago had to say about any of this stuff. So he got me out of that jam, we got DePaul out of that jam. And then he just re-engaged us in a major conversation about capital punishment. You might remember 15 years ago, Governor Quinn abolished capital punishment in Illinois. And we were celebrating that with Sister Helen Prejean and Mark LeBeau, our VP for Mission and Ministry here. And during that celebration, the Pope gave a very passionate, specific video to us, recognizing that both of his parents graduated from here. And so without DePaul, there really isn't a Pope. And that the work Illinois did 15 years ago is consistent with the approach that the church would take now, which was the same day the Department of Justice said that the new standards for execution could be strangulation and shooting and dropping off of large buildings. And so there's this moment that the Pope continues to both keep us relevant and remind us of our path and also keep us out of trouble. So if you see him, relative or tennis partner, you thank him from one Bob to another to say thank you. We have, as you know, been kind of fighting a lot in higher education. Religion has been fighting a lot. Policy has been fighting a lot. And the world has moved away from engagement to shouting. The concept of having true interactions and true meaningful dialogue has largely become a less sought after quality in the world. And I would argue that there's really only 2 organizations left maybe that can reintroduce the model of civic debate based on moral development: the church and universities, and specifically the universities based on a faith tradition. Part of why I chose to come here was I've worked in big schools without a founding faith tradition and schools that have been in confused relationships with their church. But I found the alignment between what DePaul does and what the Vincentian Catholic charisms are to be remarkably tight. And in fact, during these moments of great distress, it's somewhat calming to come back to the major charisms and say, why are we doing this? Why are we making these decisions? And how do we benefit all of our students to prepare them to go sit at the table where the most pressing questions are being had and made? And that they can enter those conversations with care and empathy for people, for respect of the dignity of the human condition, and in a hope that they can make life better for those that they interact with. There's nothing more satisfying in really tumultuous times than to have that rudder at our disposal to guide our work in this moment. And it's beginning to help in lots of ways as we seek to distinguish ourselves amongst the 4,000 other colleges that are there to the far fewer students graduating from college wanting to come. I was at a conference in DC not too long ago, and the president of Yale, Georgetown, and Harvard, and DePaul was there. And the woman from Yale, who's a brilliant scholar and a really good president, was asked, what do higher education? The answer was, she said, higher ed needs to move back to a place where we are forming people, where we're engaging the moral development of people, not just the intellectual development. And I responded by saying, well, that is a terrific approach, that we've been doing for 125 years based on a 400-year-old, which is based on a 2,000-year-old tradition. And so you can see the importance of this coming up at this moment, especially as the world is crumbling in their confidence for what higher ed can be. And I'm grateful to Bill and to all of you that are here to engage, and online, to engage this conversation and be with us. And the effect of how strong this is important to know in all aspects of the university. Students are coming here because they have this kind of feel, this kind of environment, the ethos that's here. Whether they are Catholic, Muslim, Jewish, atheist, they're coming because of that sense that they can belong and to be developed into leaders using the traditions that we have. And our donors have started to react. They recognize that the very core element of our university is at threat, and they want to give to help us keep that moving, including a recent gift by the Beeson family to endow a professorship that Bill Cavanaugh now has to make sure that there's always money and there's always somebody to think about the charisms of the Catholic Ascension faith in the work that we do and how we outreach and bring together people from around the country. And that's what I'm really most proud of and happy to see happening here. The job of a president is a lot like Santa Claus. I get to come here as a little robust guy in a suit and take credit for other people's work. Bill and the faculty in the center or in the department have done an incredible job of elevating the conversation of Catholicism, the charisms of it, to the world condition, and to bringing that together for conversation. And I can think of no better expression of what a university is about than the work you are doing here today. I want to thank you, Bill, for stepping up and continuing to lead this. And I have to leave to go do my other job, which is fundraising. And I'll be back on Sunday, looking forward to hearing how you all have accomplished what you've accomplished these couple of hours. Thank you again for being here, and thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Rob. I am really grateful for the support that you've shown us and the support that you've attracted for what we're doing here at DePaul. So, you don't know, but Rob has pull in the Vatican, able to get Pope Leo to make a video just for us. So next year, let's see if you can have him make one for World Catholicism Week. Thank you so much, Rob. All right. So, welcome everybody, and everybody here and everybody who's online. I'm Bill Cavanaugh. I'm the director of the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology. We were founded in 2008 as a research center on worldwide Catholicism, especially the Global South. And we have this World Catholicism Week conference every year, bring in speakers from around the world to deal with some pressing issue to do with the global church. And I never thought that we would have World Catholicism Week dedicated to a guy from Dalton, Illinois, but here we are. And it's because, in part, both of his parents were DePaul grads. He's a local guy, but he's gone on to become a citizen of the world and the local church, the global church, living on 3 continents, and becoming pontifex. The word literally means bridge builder amongst different parts of the world. But his biography also highlights the way that Chicago itself is not just local, but is a global city with people from every corner of the globe. And so Robert Prevost's ancestry includes French, Italian, Spanish, Louisiana Creole, African roots, and all of these strands come together in Chicago, and that's rather typical of Chicago in a lot of ways, and that includes Chicago's Catholic community, which is so much more than Irish and Polish, but includes Vietnamese and Mexican and Nigerian and Chinese and Filipino and Korean and so much more. So as we approach the first anniversary of Leo's pontificate, this conference is a good opportunity to reflect on the church and the world that Leo inherited, the events of his first year, and the future of global Catholicism under his leadership. And this conference seems to be catching kind of the Leo wave as it's cresting, right? He's just been in the news so much lately. He's completed this major journey across Africa. His remarks on the death penalty here at DePaul have been picked up by much of the national news media and highlighted the contrast between the bringing back of firing squads and so on. And of course, we really need to thank the President of the United States for keeping Leo in the limelight in the lead up to this conference, drumming up interest, making Leo the center of attention. Leo, of course, is not the one who has chosen to be the center of attention, and he would rather put the vulnerable and the marginalized people and the marginalized God who is revealed in Jesus Christ at the center. And the news media, of course, wants to depict Leo as willingly entering into a fight with the President of the United States, but he's not just one more loud oppositional voice looking for clicks and likes. He represents a theological and moral voice in a world where power is glorified regardless of whether it has any connection with the true and the good and the beautiful. And Leo represents a vision where might does not make right, but true power is understood by following a crucified God. So welcome to everybody as we explore this compelling figure over the next few days. And just a few preliminary thanks, Marlon and Karen and Elliot, who are making it all work. I want to thank Dean Guillermo Vázquez de Velasco, who's here as well, for the Dean of the College of Arts and Letters, who's been so supportive of the center over many years as well. So a round of applause, please, for Guillermo. We have a few members of Pope Leo's family here with us today. So if you would, during the breaks, maybe introduce yourselves, but we're really delighted to have you here as well. So thank you for coming. Lastly, I want to thank and introduce Kathy Cummings from the University of Notre Dame. Kathy is one of the leading historians of Catholicism in America. She was the director of the Cushwa Center for American Catholicism at the University of Notre Dame for many years. The leading center, I think I can say unequivocally, for the study of American Catholicism. And she is now leading something called the Global Catholic Research Initiative at Notre Dame, and they are partnering with us in making this conference possible. And so really want to thank you, Kathy, for your collaboration on this. And Kathy, I'm going to hand it over to you because Kathy will be the moderator for the opening session. So please join me in welcoming Kathy Cummings.
Thank you, Bill. It's an honor to be here today and to support the work of this conference this year and this exciting year. As Bill said, I'm the director of a new initiative at Notre Dame called the Global Catholic Research Initiative, which has been in the works for a long time, but by the time it was launched last July, it had taken on a new significance after the election of Pope Leo, a man who was formed in a local culture in the United States, this local culture, but went on to become embedded in other local cultures across 3 continents and to develop a global sensibility that I think was a big factor in his brother cardinals in his election last year. In that sense, he provides a model and an inspiration for U.S. Catholics and U.S. Catholic institutions to think globally. And of course, DePaul has been doing that for a long time through the Vincentian charism, and then of course through the center and under Bill's wonderful leadership. So I'm just delighted to be here and to moderate our first panel. I will introduce all 3 of our speakers in the beginning. The plan is for each of them to speak for about 10 minutes. And then I have some questions that I'll ask them. But we really want to make it a conversation. So we hope to have a very engaged conversation with everybody, a lot of back and forth. So let me introduce them in alphabetical order and in the order in which they'll speak. Our first speaker is Afe Adogame, and he is the Maxwell M. Upson Professor of Religion and Society and current chair of the Religion and Society program at Princeton Theological Seminary. He holds a PhD in the history of religions and has served as Associate Professor of World Christianity and Religious Studies, as well as Director International at the School of Divinity, New College at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. He is also Professor Extraordinaire at South Africa's University of Stellenbosch. That sounds like a wonderful Professor Extraordinaire. That's something to aspire to. Professor Adogame's teaching and research interests focus on interrogating new dynamics of religious experiences and expressions in Africa and the African diaspora, with a particular focus on African Christianities and new indigenous religious movements, as well as the interconnectedness between religion and migration, globalization, politics, economy, media, and civil society. His most recent publications include Topographies of African Spirituality, that appeared with Routledge in 2025, and the Routledge Handbook of Research Methods in the Study of Indigenous Religions. Our second speaker is Emilce Cuda, the Secretary of the Vatican Curia's Pontifical Commission for Latin America. She was appointed by Pope Francis in 2021. Emilce also serves as an advisor to CELAM, the Latin American and Caribbean Bishops' Conference, and adjunct assistant professor for Loyola University of Chicago's Institute of Pastoral Studies. In addition, she is a member of the International Catholic Migration Commission's research team, The Future of Work, Labor After Laudato Si, and belongs to the global network of Catholic theological ethics in the World Church. Emilce's past work includes serving as professor researcher at various institutions in Argentina, including the Pontifical Catholic University of Argentina. She has been a visiting scholar in the United States at Boston College, Northwestern University, and DePaul University. She holds a PhD in theology from the Pontifical Catholic University of Argentina and is the author of Para leer a Francisco, Teologia, Ética y Política, published in Spanish and Italian. Our final panelist is Christopher White. Since July of 2025, Christopher has served as the Associate Director for Strategic Engagement and Senior Fellow of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life at Georgetown University. Prior to that, he was the Vatican and National Correspondent for National Catholic Reporter and covered the conclave last spring. Out of that reporting, he authored Pope Leo XIV, Inside the Conclave and the Dawn of a New Papacy, which was published by Loyola Press last summer. Chris has also worked as a reporter for Crux, and his work appeared in the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and the Washington Post, among many other print and online publications. Chris has regularly appeared on television radio programs, including CNN, NPR, NBC, and the BBC, and he is a Vatican analyst for NBC and MSNBC. He holds a master's in ethics from Fordham University and a bachelor's in politics, philosophy, and economics from the King's College in New York City. I have had a sneak peek at the panelist presentations, and I can assure you that we're in for a very stimulating next couple of hours. So please join me in welcoming Professor Afe Adogame to speak first. Thank you.
Okay, so good afternoon. Let me start with a word of gratitude to Bill and Stan and the faculty of the center, and to Karen and Marlon for inviting me. I would like to start with a quick disclaimer. The first one is that I will not pretend to be an expert on Catholic studies. Actually, I'm an outsider. But I appreciate this opportunity that has really enriched me in the past couple of months to read about Pope Leo. The second, very quickly, I want to warn you, I flew here from Singapore, which has 14 hours time difference. It's 3 a.m., and I just had lunch at 3 a.m. to present. So, all right, so I have titled my talk, Africa is no longer a little child, Pope Leo's Papacy, Africa and Global Religious Reimagination. And I'm just going to extract a few footnotes from a longer paper, since we've been asked to just speak for 10 minutes. So, until last week, I didn't finish writing my paper because my data was still in progress. The Pope was still in Africa, so I had to wait until his return. And what I would like to do is quickly to show the roadmap of my presentation. First, I think it's important to think around the politics of an African Pope, a myth or a reality, even as we consider the role and contribution so far of Pope Leo. In my paper, I also tried to contrast Pope Francis and Pope Leo within the framework of what I would call continuity, consolidation, and change. I might not have time to tease that out clearly. And then the very important question, Pope Leo, who has been seen as friend of Africa, what does this really mean? And then I will end with a few reflections about the most recent apostolic journey. And then if I have time, leave you with some issues to think with. So on May 6, 2025, Archbishop Nwachukwu made headlines at the colloquium with his unprecedented remarks, quote, Africa is often seen as a little child in a cradle, whose voice is perceived as a disturbing cry, and who needs to be calmed by giving her some milk in the form of development aid, unquote. I would argue that beyond this metaphor, I would like to interrogate the place, role, and relevance of Africa within ecclesial cartographical maps of the universe. The Archbishop's personification of the continent as no longer a little child enables a critical reminiscence of Pope Leo's prior interactions, past itineraries, existing relationships and networks, as well as the 10-day apostolic journeys to Africa as significant pathways for reimagining the future of Africa's past within global Catholicism. I think it's important to reflect a little about what I would suggest is a recurring controversy that has emerged in recent decades about whether the Catholic Church would ever name or appoint a Black Pope. And the public quest for the first Black Pope has been largely touted in ways that betray public ignorance. And I think it will be ahistorical not to think that the Church has never produced a Black Pope. And history tells us that there had been 3 African popes. What would be the fate of Africa or African Catholicism and world Catholicism under Pope Leo's papacy as Christianity continues to witness shifting contours of its center of gravity from the global north to the global south? Archbishop Nwachukwu's provocateur stirs up, I would argue, wider discourses that are not unconnected with the coloniality of power and an ingrained global ecclesial political and economic hegemonies. And I think it's an important point for us, therefore, to think around this, especially as we reflect on Pope Leo's papacy. How might Pope Leo's solidarize and continue to network with African Catholics, thus empowering them to take their rightful place and position within world Catholicism? If you ask me as a non-Catholic and an outsider whether the Catholic Church will produce an African Pope in my lifetime, my naive answer is likely to be that, going by demographics and other indicators, probably yes. That is, if selection is by vote or referendum. But going by global religious politics and ecclesial hegemony, I would say that I'm cautiously optimistic. It's highly improbable. And it is against this backdrop, I would suggest that perhaps the Catholic Church might need to be moving into futurity and not just recovering the past. I'm going to skip a lot of slides where I've kind of shown the whole idea of the Black Pope, which has been represented severally in previous works. But again, it's important to see, if you are thinking about the indicators to make an argument why Africa is ripe for appointing or having a Black Pope, it's not just simply demographics. There's more to show. There are many more indicators, and time will not let me to dive into that. So let me fast forward to the historical present by prefacing or looking at the rearview mirror of Pope Francis' papacy, legacy, and connections to Africa, and to leverage, assess, and chart the incumbent Pope Leo's prior interactions, past itineraries, and existing relationships and networks, as well as the recent visits. Again, because of time, I will skip slides where I try to contrast Pope Francis and Pope Leo. Sorry about this. Monoko and Zane news article, Africa remembers a Pope who spoke for the continent, perhaps best summarizes what Pope Francis meant for Africa. And of course, we can look at those contributions quite interestingly, but when we contrast that with Pope Leo, I think there's some continuity. There's also consolidation and change. Again, if we look at Roy Aboya's suggestion that a Black Pope would give African voice it deserves, and also says Africa is the great diplomatic challenge for the Catholic Church, unquote, I would like to rephrase this in the meantime and ask, would Pope Leo, as friend of Africa and one who knows Africa well, also give African voice it deserves? And I think this is an important question, and it's just about a year. We need time to be able to respond. And so what I'm trying to do in my presentation is to pose quite a lot of questions, and I hope that you have the answers to these questions. So for my presentation, I tried to look at, much of my data was drawn from church media, agenda fights, the Vatican news, and so on and so forth. And I'm asking this important question: what does the Pope's familiarity, but also frequent visits, mean for the maturity and futurity of African Catholicism within World Catholicism? What important signals does the recent visit send to the Catholic Church and the global public about how to reimagine the place, role, and stature of African Catholicism in a fast-changing cosmos? So I showed quite a lot of pictures that I found from some of these magazines and newspapers, just to make a case that, well, he's very familiar with the continent. And I will just go through a number of them, and that will bring me to the last part of my presentation. So Pope Leo has been depicted as a friend of Africa, and as this news article generously depicts him as a bridge builder. And I won't have time to read these quotes, but while one may not generally agree with all the characterization in this long paragraph, perhaps Pope Leo's recent pastoral visit and conversations while traveling through 4 African countries might shed some important light. So in December 2025, Pope Leo himself indicated his desire to visit Africa, specifically mentioning Algeria as a potential destination to continue the conversation of dialogue of building bridges between the Christian world and the Muslim world. And Algeria was important as the only Muslim majority country on the Pope's visit. But at the same time, North Africa has been represented as the Bible Belt of early Christianity. And that informed the visit to the birthplace of St. Augustine. And we think about Equatorial Guinea as Africa's only Spanish-speaking country. The Papa visit marks a return of the pontiff after more than 4 decades, but also placed the small Central African nation firmly on the global ecclesia map. Angola was the 3rd country, a Portuguese-speaking South African nation representing the Lusophone world. And finally, Cameroon, which is a bilingual nation where English and French-speaking Cameroonians are struggling to coexist. And such an itinerary reflects symbolically the linguistic and cultural diversity on the one hand of the African continent, while at the same time underscoring the universal character of the Catholic Church. So what I would just do is take 2 minutes to tease out the significance, what I consider to be the significance of this visit. So Pope Leo's first pastoral visit to the African continent has been largely historic, with unprecedented religious, political, social, economic, diplomatic, and strategic ramifications. And I would argue that its wide-ranging import and impact can be teased out both in the local but also in the global political terrain. Although adequate publicity has been given to this visit, it was nonetheless overshadowed in some respects, as his bold pronouncements ruffled feathers of some political entrepreneurs, like President Trump's tirade on social media. All this generated unwarranted controversies in the public arena that reverberated globally. The Pope garnered commendation, solidarity, and support from various religious and political constituencies, and I don't have time to give examples of that, which were remarkable. So, just to come to the end of my presentation, I have been paying attention to themes emerging from his utterances and pronouncements, as well as symbolic visits to specific places and of historical and religious sites, but also participation in some activities. And throughout his visit between April 13th to 23rd in these 4 countries, the Pope has called unrepentantly for sustainable peace, unity, and interreligious dialogue, bridge building, multilateralism among states to find enduring solutions, empowerment of youth and women, of local leadership, African Matters Initiative, human rights, social justice, hope and reliance. And you can go on and on. While at the same time critiquing war, violence, conflicts, economic exploitation, inhuman treatment of immigrants, corruption and inequalities, corrupt and authoritarian leadership, and urging leaders to put people first. How do I summarize this? I think that both his utterances and also those places he visited and the activities he took part in have not only implications for Africa, but for the global scene. So the stark admonitions reverberated both locally and globally in Africa and beyond. For each of these themes that he was either admonishing or critiquing, speaks to not just African leaders, but also even leaders in our dear country here. Such critical pronouncements resonate locally, but they also reveal some of Pope Leo's charisma, character, virtues, and pontifical priorities. And I want to end by saying that the bold statements meant to stir up and call out political and religious entrepreneurs in Africa and beyond, and to send an important message that it is no longer business as usual. I would like to stop there for now.
Thank you so much for this invitation at DePaul University. I was here years ago, so always is my pleasure to be here. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Karen, Marlo, everybody. Stan was here too with me, so it's my pleasure to be here. And I am happy because this is the first time that I don't use my natural intelligence, but my artificial intelligence to do that. It's incredible. It's incredible. I put all my paper inside and appear this. So this is a miracle. Well, it's great. I'd like to speak about, well, listen, I remember when Pope Francis became Pope, we can found millions of images about the Pope because each people reflect or put in the new Pope their ideas, no? So the Pope was communist, the Pope was Peronist, the Pope was liberation theology, but one journalist was not Chris White, said, the Pope is Christian. And the people, wow, this is great, So the Pope Leo, is a working process for everybody. I remember one time I told him, who knows who is Leo? I know Prevost was my boss, the best boss that I had, and I am sad because I lost a very good boss. But who is Leo? Each of us are the result of our decision, depend of the situation. Depend of the situation that the life put behind us. So who is Leo? Maybe neither himself know that. Because when he assumed his pontificate, he never imagined this world in peace that we have at the moment. And he is at the center because other people take that decision that he will be at the center. So who is Leo? Who knows? Maybe in 20 years, we can speak about him. But in relationship with the pontificate in itself, I would like to speak about the importance of the continuity. Because we listen a lot of time from Pope Francis about the church as the unity in the difference. God is the unity in the distinction, not in the difference. It's a little precision in theology, but it's important. Inside of the Trinity, we have the distinction, not the difference. But between the society, when we have the difference, the unity is impossible. But if we can recognize the distinctions and not the difference, we can to arrive to the unity. Why I tell you that? Because in the case of Pope Leo, he is from North America or from South America, depends. Here we have people American people from Chicago speaking about the Pope Leo is North American and from Chicago. But we are going to listen Cesar Piscoya and Paola Ogas. They are from Peru, from Lima, Agustinian, from Chiclayo. So for them, Pope Leo is from Peru. In my opinion, we must to see in the pontificate, in the institution of the pontificate, the unity. And that's the reason why each person can to see the reflection of their own culture in the new Pope, always. Always. Because this is the idea. The pontificate is exactly a bridge. It's not to take one position or other position. Maybe Prevost, yes, but now he is Leon. And this is the Catholicism, how to arrive to the unity. And is his ¿cómo se dice? Su escudo, ¿no? In illo unum, ¿no? En él, in him, we, all of us are one. So this is the idea. But in my case, I am speaking about from the Americas. And so the pontificate is an institution that is in itself the unity in the difference, but must be the unity in the distinction. And the difference is a consequence of the discourse determination. For example, when the people say Pope Francis was liberation theology, well, in Spanish will be teología de la liberación. The determination is for them to say that is not theology. If this is liberation theology, the second step is to say, because that is liberation theology, that is not theology. So the real theology is the theology who is not liberation of theology, liberation of the people. And that was the cancellation that for two centuries come from Europe. And that happened in Latin America with liberation theology in the 20th century, but at the same time happened in North America with the Americanism in the 19th century. So we have two examples where the church from the peripheries, when arrived to the center, not in the difference, but in the distinction, because the theology is the same, because the fundamentation is the same, the gospel, the tradition, and the social teaching of the church. So it's not another theology. It's not a different theology. It's not an essential difference. It's a modal difference. This is different. It's the same theology from the same foundation and principles, but in another modality. So there we have the unity in the distinction, because the unity in the difference is impossible. But each time that the new modality of theology arrives to the center, that is theology of, and then we can say that is not theology. In the case of we have two popes consecutive that come not from Europe for the first time in 2,000 years, but from the periphery, North America and Latin America. Of course, it's a different modality of to do the same theology, and which is the modality that we as the Americas have in common. The point to start. In the Americas, Latin America, Central America, and North America, and this is the same in all the global south, Africa and part of Asia, the point to start for to do theology is not the idea, is the reality. That happened not only in theology, that happened in politics, and that happened in philosophy. For example, the pragmatism, the American pragmatism, the philosophy of the pragmatism, that in Europe, oh wow, that is something absolutely, that is not philosophy, for example. But the idea that we start from the reality for do the reflection, this is a distinction that is at the same time constitutive from the thoughts from the Americas. And in that point, in my case, I can to found the continuity from these two popes that arrived to the center from the peripheries. And we can see, for example, the last 2 weeks ago about a conversation in media, but was not a real conversation between the Pope and some political men. What is moral theology? What is moral to the Catholicism? And one of them said, when you speak about politics or migration or all the social problems, that is not theology. And the Pope said, no, that is theology. This is the thought social. Where is the problem? The problem is not in the Pope. The problem is not in the person who thinks different. The problem is in the culture. What the culture really think that is moral theology. That's a problem. What we learn about Catholicism. Some of we learn that Catholicism is an idea. And when other people arrive with the praxis to do the reflection or the theological reflection, that is not theology. So, in my opinion, the difference is to think from where we start to do the discernment, not only in theology, but in philosophy and in business. I don't know any businessman, a rich businessman, who start from one idea. They start from the reality, looking the opportunity, and then trying to take the results from there. If you start from the idea, you are a poet, but you will be never a businessman. I receive in my office each day maybe 10 or 15 persons who arrive with great and big ideas. And I listen to them, because if the Pope receives them, I must receive them. But at last I say, do you have the money for that? No. So, next. So the reality, the real life is that we always start from the reality. Jesus Christ is not an idea. We believe that God was incarnate in a man, he died, he resuscitated, no me sale, and is alive between us. It's real, it's not an idea. So this is a problem to accept. It's not the problem if the person is from Latin America, from North America, from Africa, or Asia. The problem is from where we start to do the discernment, what is good or what is bad for me or for everybody around me. And sometimes I remember that to my students at the university, I finished my 10 minutes. Well, I remember my students, I worked in different universities, but one of that university was exactly in the periphery of the peripheries, no? Outside Buenos Aires. And I drive an hour and a half to arrive there. And all my students there had learned that it's bad to speak about money. We mustn't think in money. You must to learn that you are not doing things for money. This is stupid. Then, when the people work, it's impossible that they ask for best salary, because if you are a moral person, you can't speak about money. We teach that to the poor people. But in the best universities of business, we never teach that. So this is another example from where we start. Because when the people say we need better work, we need documents, we need better health, they are starting from the reality. But we resist to listen to people speak from the reality, and we promote to start from the idea. So in the case of Pope Francis and Pope Leo, I don't know if they are something, I have my own opinion, of course, because thank God I know very well both. But in this case, I am speaking not about specifically of each of them, but about the institution of the pontificate that does meet the unity in the distinction, not in the difference. But in this case, the continuity is not in their self, it's in the continents. What arrived to the Curia Romana is not one person from south and one person from north. Who arrived there is the culture, the philosophy, and the history that in the past was the new continent. And after how many years? For, I don't know, ¿cuándo se descubrió América? 1,000 years, I don't know. Sí, ya sé, pero no puedo hacer la cuenta. Entonces, in that, is after centuries and centuries, the people think that we are the new, we are the exotic, And not only me, because I am the worst. I am woman, lie, from Latin America, and the worst is from Argentina. But in Europe, all of us are something strange. Americans, what is that? Tourists, they are tourists, only tourists that eat hamburger. So this is true. Or think that Buenos Aires is part of Brazil, for example. So we must, at the same time, stay out of the auto-referential culture. It's important to understand what it means. What it means to have, for the second time, a person that comes from the Americas, because between themselves, there are a big difference. One born in the United States, the other born in Argentina. One was the archbishop of one of the biggest metropolis, as is Buenos Aires. But the other was only bishop in a little town. So the reality that they live as bishop was, at the same time, absolutely different. And the decision that they must to take as bishop was absolutely different. So I think, to repeat and to conclude, the continuity is the essential characteristic of the pontificate, but in this case, the continuity is that they arrive with the culture of the Americas, that is to start to the reality and not to the idea, to the center. And the rest is the history, how he arrived to be Pope. And this is your job, Chris. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emilce, for that. I can guarantee you that Emilce is the only Vatican curial official that you'll meet that speaks as bluntly and honestly as she does. She's a rarity in a place that is sort of defined by its formalities. Thank you, Bill, for having me here. It's great to be here at DePaul. The first time I met Bill was in Nigeria. The second time was in Kenya. And finally, last fall, I met him in the US for the first time. So it's great to be here. I want to begin with the disclaimer, which is that I'm not a theologian. I'm not a historian. I come to this as a journalist who covered the Vatican and covered the conclave in real time. And so that's the hat that I'm wearing. And it's strange to think back where we were exactly a year ago, this time last year. And I'm going to make a very humble brag, which is that exactly 1 year ago today, I published a piece in the National Catholic Reporter under the headline, quote, "The first American Pope. This cardinal has the best chance of making history in this conclave." This was a piece as a part of a series that I had written on the Papabile, a series that my editor at the time, Heidi Schlumpf, had made sure that I had been working on for years in the lead up to this moment. And one of the observations I made was this, quote, "Prevost brings to the table pastoral experience in the peripheries with expertise in navigating the complexities of the Church's central governance, a rare combination for those seeking a potential pope who shares the priorities of Francis with a greater prioritization on governance." When Pope Francis died last year on April 21st, I think it's fair to say that the Catholic Church was at a crossroads. The choice faced by the College of Cardinals was effectively to decide whether or not to continue down the path of reform that Francis had initiated. And we can talk about the various elements of that reform, but for the sake of this conversation, I'll just use one word, and that is synodality. Pope Francis's push to make the church less clerical, more participatory, more inclusive, and really allowing the church for the first time in a very long time to sort of rethink its structures and to rethink its way of being in the world. And that was very much his legacy. And because of that, I very much believe that the conclave last year was a referendum on that legacy and a referendum on synodality in particular. Much of Pope Francis's pontificate could be seen, I think, as opening up spaces. Emilce just talked about Francis often talking about realities are greater than ideas. And he really wanted the church to, as an institution, reckon with this. And when he died, the cardinals had to ask themselves whether or not they wanted to continue in that mode of being church. In my book on the conclave, I draw the comparison of the Second Vatican Council. Pope John the 23rd had opened the Second Vatican Council in 1962 and then died a year into it. When the cardinals met to elect his successor, they faced the question, should the church continue this reform process of opening itself up to the modern world, or should they reverse course? They chose in that conclave to proceed ahead, but to elect someone who was very different in style to carry out those reforms. After Francis died last year, cardinals came to Rome. That is the chief job of a cardinal, to participate in the election of a new pope, to meet in these meetings known as general congregations. They're closed to the press, and it's really a time for them to have an honest assessment of what happened during the last papacy, what the last guy did well, and what the next guy could perhaps do better. And these are really a moment to have honest conversations to reckon with the needs of the church and the needs of the world in this particular moment. I think it's fair to say they talked about the priorities for the church before they started talking about any one particular candidate. But there were candidates, of course, and that was part of my job as Vatican reporters to sort of shortlist who the cardinals were talking about and the cases for or against them. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, so I'll kind of go through them quickly. There was Italian Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who was Pope Francis's longtime Secretary of State and is still Pope Leo's Secretary of State, who I think went into the conclave as the real favorite, surely on the fact that he was the most known quantity among them. He was a very successful church diplomat and had served in posts all around the world. And so many of the cardinals and those on the outside thought, he has name recognition. And in a moment and in a conclave where 80% of the men in that room had never participated in a conclave, they at least knew who Cardinal Pietro Parolin was. There was Cardinal Tagle, who's often been referred to as the Asian Pope Francis. He's got a very winsome, sort of charismatic style, shares a lot of the priorities as Pope Francis, concern for the poor and the marginalized. There were questions about whether or not he had the necessary management experience to govern the very unwieldy institution known as the Roman Curia, where Emilce works. It was Cardinal Grech, who runs the Vatican Synod office, who was seen as someone who could perhaps carry on the mission of synodality if the cardinals wanted to continue down that path. And there was also Cardinal Peter Erdu, who was the sort of candidate of those wanting real reform in the sense of a course correction. Erdu's from Hungary, and he's like Leo, has a background as a canon lawyer. And in the words of Cardinal George Pell, before he died, he's someone who can clean up the place. So that was kind of the lay of the land. And in that, another name began to emerge quietly, but consistently, and that was Cardinal Robert Prevost. Now, conventional wisdom has long held that there would never be a pope from the United States, at least while the United States is a superpower in the world. Since we're here in his home diocese, I'll quote the late Cardinal George, who said, "Until America goes into political decline, there won't be an American pope." I don't know if that's commentary on the state of America today, but that's what he said. There's also Cardinal McElroy, who before he was sent to Washington, D.C., was asked when he got his red hat in San Diego, he said, the reporter asked him, "One day you'll have to be in the Sistine Chapel. Could you be Pope?" And he said, "I would very strongly oppose the idea of any American being elected Pope." He has since said that he has changed his mind about that. But with Cardinal Prevost, now Pope Leo, many of those men that were tasked with electing a pope didn't think of him as the typical American. He'd spent, as Emilce mentioned, roughly a third of his life in the United States, a third of it in Latin America, and a third of it in Europe. Some might call him a globalist, but I think the more accurate word is he was a missionary. Prior to becoming Pope, he had said it was his missionary experience in Peru that had formed him as a priest in a diocese that was really made alive by the reforms of the Second Vatican Council, where resources were invested in lay catechesis and where co-responsibility between priests and laity operated was the standard mode of operating. Priests standing alongside their people as they battled government corruption, climate change, and other struggles, And if you have any doubt of that, there are great photos of Padre Roberto on the back of a donkey and wearing rain boots that I think attest to that spirit of pastoral ministry that sort of formed him in Peru. There were also other important resume factors. He had been the head of a religious order. The Augustinians operate in over 50 countries around the world, so he knew how to govern. And he'd also been brought to Rome by Pope Francis to run the very powerful and sometimes sensitive office, the Vatican's dicastery for bishops, which is responsible for vetting potential bishops' appointments around the world. So he knew how to maneuver his way around the complicated systems of the Vatican machine. And in a conclave where 70 countries were represented, he also had language skills, which meant he could talk to the men who were there. And he wasn't someone who sought the limelight, but in dinner table conversations and at coffee breaks, he was someone that was seen as approachable. People saw him as someone who shared Pope Francis's priorities, but also had a steady hand in government. And I think many of the cardinals who wanted to continue in the same direction of travel as Pope Francis saw him as someone taking what Francis had started and consolidating it, as Afe said. Now, leading up to the conclave, some cardinals had told me they believed it would be the most important conclave in at least 60 years since the one at the time of the Second Vatican Council. Those high stakes, combined with the fact that many of the cardinals didn't know each other very well, led some to predict a long and drawn-out conclave. But on May 8th, white smoke appeared just after 4 ballots. And since I've got just a bit of time, I'll tell the story because Steve Milley's insisted I tell the story. I was on the rooftop of the Augustinianum, one of the religious houses overlooking St. Peter's Square for NBC News. And next to me was another Chicago native, now Bishop Robert Barron. And at a moment off camera, Bishop Barron says, well, it's, 4 ballots, quick conclave. It clearly has to be Cardinal Parolin. I told him, I said, well, I think it's probably Cardinal Robert Prevost. And he laughed at me and said that was just an idea that reporters would dream up hoping to sell papers. And then a few minutes later, when Cardinal Robert Prevost had walked out on the balcony as Pope Leo XIV, I got the last laugh. Leo appeared on the loggia of St. Peter's saying that he had a dream of a united church searching together for peace and justice, working together as women and men faithful to Jesus Christ without fear, proclaiming Christ to be missionaries faithful to the gospel. When I heard those words, I thought this was very substantively reflective of the same words that Francis often used in the final years of his papacy, a church that is open to todos, 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 tutti, 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 everyone, everyone, everyone. A few days after the conclave, I spoke to one of his brother Augustinians, and he referred to Leo's speech that night of his election, and he said, that's the libretto. We know the playbook if you're an Augustinian. Leo's trying to give us a foundation to talk to one another again. I think dialogue and the ability to talk to each other is hardly a novel idea, but it's a vision of the church and a vision of the world that's starkly different from what's being offered by other Americans on the world stage at the moment. And for that, I think we can all say, Viva il Papa.
Thank you all for those interesting reflections, and there's certainly a lot more to talk about. So I'm going to start with a question for each of you, directed specifically to each of you, but feel free to weigh in. As I said, we're going to try to make this as conversational as possible. So Afe, I'll start with you, and I'm going to borrow a phrase from a colleague of mine, Manuel, who teaches at Notre Dame with me. And when he, in the run up to before the Africa trip, he used a phrase that I found very hopeful. He said that Pope Leo is going to Africa not to give Africa hope, but to find hope. And in the longer version of your paper, you talked about many ways in which the church in Africa can give hope to the universal church in ways that reflect the center of gravity shift, increasing center of gravity shift to the global south. Could you share some of those? What do you think the gift of African Catholicism is to the universal church?
Okay, no, thank you. Thank you for that question. Yes, I think, again, this calls for us to deconstruct when we often say that the center of gravity of Christianity is shifting from the global south to the global north to the south. We should be asking questions, what does this really mean? And I think demographic statistics is just one out of several indicators. And I think one other area has to do with vitality, religious vitality. What is the shape and content of this spirituality? What does the North, what does the West need to learn from, Catholics, from Christians in the global South? I think it's a question of religious vitality. In the North, we are often talking about a dynamic which also shapes the politicization of statistics. When you think about you look at statistics of Catholics in the US and in Europe and elsewhere, those statistics are skewed because in this part of the world, we have a tendency, a new dynamic of believing without belonging and belonging without believing. In the global South, if you are a Catholic, you go to church, you go to Mass every Sunday and maybe Friday and Thursday. There's no chance to say, well, I'm a Catholic because my great-grandparents were Catholics. So we need to revisit those statistics because the statistics that we are given, the global statistics, are not accurate. So one thing that can be learned is how Catholics, how Christians in that part of the world take Christianity seriously. In expression, but also in experience. And that is why, again, what happens is that, and I think I would take a cue from the point you are making, there's a tendency to demonize, the kind of Christian expression from those parts of the world, to think, oh, this is not real Christianity. There's a problem there. And I think it's been said that Christians in this part of the world prayed for a revival, and when the revival eventually came, they didn't recognize it because it was black. So the wake-up call, the future of the Catholic Church, the future of Christianity to a large extent today is in the global South, not also because of the vitality, but also the youth. The youth is no longer the future of the church. The youth is the present of the church, but it's also the future. So what kind of Christianity, what kind of Catholicism do we want the youth to embrace? And I think that is $1 million question. So I would say that while Africa has a lot to learn from Catholicism, from world Catholicism has a lot to learn from Africa, but that will not happen until we stop demonizing, and diabolizing the kind of Christianity as, oh, this is not authentic, this must be African culture, blah, blah, blah. And the whole nonsense about syncretism. And we often forget that Christianity has been syncretistic right from its onset. So that's part of the problem.
Thank you. Emilce, I really want to know, I want to hear a story about why Cardinal Prevost was such a good boss. So if you'll share one of those. But I'll ask you a larger question first. I appreciated your distinction between difference and distinction. And I wanted to ask you to elaborate on two distinctions between Pope Leo and Pope Francis as relate to Latin America in particular. So the first is something you mentioned. Francis was the metropolitan of a large urban diocese, whereas Prevost was a bishop in a more rural Peru. And could you talk about it? Because we tend to think about Latin America as one place, and of course it's very diverse. So could you talk about how, elaborate a little more about how those different experiences might shape them? And then a second distinction between them is generationally. And I think of Pope Francis reflecting on attending Puebla, as the Puebla conference, as superior of the Jesuits at the time, whereas Prevost got to Peru as a young missionary in the several years after Puebla. Does that generationally, the fact that there's 20 years between them, not quite, how does that shape their outlook on the world? And the story about why he's such a great boss. One story would be great. Thank you.
Well, he was a great boss because we worked together in the programs like I work with Chris or with Bill. No? He never received me like a boss. He always because when he arrived to the office, I was there for 2 years before. So the first thing was to try to understand how was the program, Build the Bridges, that was in my I had the coordinator, and he support that. And he support that valientemente, no? Strong. Because, of course, our program starts from the reality, and that produced resistance. And Pope Leo, in that case, Robert Prevost, signed the documents, signed the letters, and he was so friendly. He was free to express what he feel in different situations. Other people in that position, as Chris said, to be the prefect of the bishop of the dicastery of bishop is one of the highest, is the highest position there, no? Because it's the government of the church. And he was a priest. He was a friend. But second, in the case of the difference, well, Latin America, as you said, is not one thing. It's not the same to be in Mexico or to be in Haiti, to be in Guatemala, Buenos Aires, Colombia, Venezuela. It's absolutely, but the biggest difference is how was the economical development. And we can do a division between West Coast and East Coast. In the East Coast, we have Argentina, Brazil, countries that had in the past made an industrial development. And the economical situation is different in Peru, Venezuela, Colombia. It's another economy. They to arrive to an industrial development, there you have political organization. So this idea that the community, that nobody save alone, but you need the community, this is not an idea. He was working with the people, and the same with Prevost. Something in common, that was a big difference. Bergoglio was in contact with politics, union workers, leaders. He was in the periphery with addictions, with prostitution. This was the contact. In the periphery, because other thing, when the people think in Latin America, thinking indigenous. For example, yesterday I had a conversation with a person about art from the peripheries, and he said, oh yes, I like original indigenous art. And I said, but art from the peripheries is not that, no? So this is a big confusion. And it's different, of course, but something in common is the Civil War. I like that one of the students today mentioned that, because the Civil War in Latin America is an important point to understand what the politics is not political party, but popular movement. We have no time to explain that here, but it's absolutely different. And both know the reality, what happened with the people when they are in a civil war. So they know that, they know the suffering of the people. And in that case, both start from the same point. Of course, the Prevost spoke and speak a lot of language, and this is a big advantage in a meeting with businessmen, with people from not only with religious people, but at the Vatican, or right presidents, president of the companies, president of the countries, and I was present in a deep conversation with important people from the business sector, and that the Pope can to speak in English, perfect, in French, perfect. So this and Spanish. So at the moment, this is an important difference that help a lot. Not the Pope, help the church. So that's my perception.
Thank you. Chris, you mentioned Cardinal Prevost's administrative savvy is something that kind of led you to think that he did indeed have a good chance. And he has a wealth of administrative experience. A year in, has that translated to the enormously complex Vatican bureaucracy? And what have been some of his wins as you see them in terms of navigating that bureaucracy, and where might he have some challenges?
These are early days. And years ago, a head of a Vatican office said that the only way in which real reform would take root would be heads on pikes along the Tiber. And the idea was, it's very hard to reform the Vatican. I think one of the things he's doing as a starting point is he's trying to get the Vatican offices to start collaborating with each other. I have a quote in my book from Anna Rowlands, a British theologian. And she says, if Francis wanted a synodal church, Leo wants a more synodal papacy. And what she meant by that specifically is that, the early signs is that he is going to use his cardinals to sort of take and expect a greater sort of share and support in the governance of the church. There are pros and cons to that as well. But I think we saw from the meeting he called this past January of the cardinals, the fact that he's calling them back to Rome in June for another consistory is the technical term, that he's invested in this sort of mode of collaboration. And I think he thinks if synodality is going to take root, then the Roman Curia has to start practicing itself first to be good models of this. So I think that's kind of what is guiding his approach to governance. I do think, when it comes to issues like finances, for example, there's just going to be some, this is where his, Americanism might be very useful, that he'll probably insist on outside experts in a way in which that in past attempts have been sort of stymied in the Vatican. There haven't been any major reform efforts at the Vatican's communications department, and that's expected at some time. I don't want to put a timeline on it, but that's a huge. It's the largest department inside the Vatican. It's the communications apparatus, and that will be a real sort of challenge for him. So I think this first year has been a lot of listening. If you look at the Vatican Daily Bulletin, you can just see he's holding an extraordinary number of meetings. So I think he spent this first year on kind of a listening tour. And so, frankly, it's just too early to say, to assess the success. But I think moving in the right direction, at least.
Well, we can hope. Well, I have plenty of questions, but why don't we open it up? I just ask that if you'd like to ask a question, please use the microphone in the middle for the benefit of people listening virtually. And also, if there are questions from people on Zoom, too, I know that there's a mechanism for that. So please, Ken. Yeah.
This question is for Afe. You used the phrase religious entrepreneurs. In this country, that would refer to evangelists. It would refer to independent Baptists, of which there are tens of thousands. It would refer to Joel Osteen on television. It would refer to a lot of Pentecostal ministries. It would certainly refer to Paula White, who is pastor to churchless Mr. Trump. What does it mean in your culture? I suspect you're talking about, I've seen similar manifestations in Africa, but I'm wondering what you meant by that, because I suspect you meant it pejoratively, but perhaps I misunderstood.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yes, I think I'm just using religious entrepreneurs as an umbrella term for religious leadership. And of course, without making distinctions between the good, the bad, and the ugly. Yeah, so it's an umbrella term. It embraces anyone who is in a position of leadership, you know,
Okay. Right.
and whatever the make of that leadership is a different question entirely. But whether in the church or in the political terrain, on the economic terrain, you always will have the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm not sure it's my task to put people in those different boxes. You do have these different examples you mentioned. I think it's not difficult for people to identify who falls into what box or the other. So it's just a kind of a general term. I didn't use it pejoratively. I feel free putting on my sociological hat to kind of use an umbrella term without saying religious leadership.
You're
Does that-
safe. You're safe.
Okay.
Emilce, you could you talk about the difference in the mottos between Pope Francis and Pope Leo, mercy versus unity, and how they may relate to each other?
The modality?
The motto.
La moral.
The motto.
Moral?
Miserando
lema.
cuando,
Yes.
miserando cuando elegendo.
Well, it's a long dissertation, but it's interesting because the lemma of Pope Francis is the modality to do or to put in practice the social teaching of the church.
Mm-hmm.
The social teaching of the church. He said that in his discourse to the Pontifical Academy of Theology. There, he said that the social teaching of the church is not something that we can learn in a claustro, in an academic, neither to teach in a space like this. And the social teaching of the church is a practice. It's a practice of testimonio. And that testimonio is in English? I don't know how much
Testimony.
testimony.
Yeah.
And that testimony is a testimony of misericordia. So the idea is to do theology when we are doing the testimony. And that is the first article of the new Curiam, Roman Curiam Constitution. The name is Predicate Evangelium, to preach the gospel. And there, this new constitution doesn't speak about the contents of the predication, but about the modality of the predication. So the modality is touching the flesh of Jesus Christ in the people. Doing or predicate the gospel with word, but with chest. And that is misericordia. But in the case of Prevost, in illo unum, no? en él somos, in him we are one, is the idea of the unity. That is the idea. And to arrive to the unity, we must to show that given testimony. For example, today, in one of the exposition of the students, surprised me, there said that 80% of it's a number so high about women in United States that die when they are in the maternity, cuando están dando a luz, no? When they are. This is surprised me that happened in the country where the Christian and the Catholic moral is pro-life. How is that possible? So that is an example of difference between idea and reality. So to see what happened and to feel to do testimony is misericordia. If we can arrive to there, we will be one in the distinction. No, I think both are two faces of the same coin, and I agree with Chris and with Anna Rowlands that Prevost is going to do the synodality inside the Curia. In my opinion, I only speak with one journalist between Pope Francis died and Prevost became Pope. And I said, the reality is like a hot soup. To take a hot soup, you must start from the borders to the center. Mm-hmm. That was the work of Pope Francis. Start with the borders, working in the public opinion, working in the church of the peripheries. But then, in my opinion, I am not the Pope. I am speaking because you give me a microphone. But the challenge maybe of Pope Leo will be enter to the center, to consolidate that synodality in the periphery now in the center. And this is the idea that the time win over the space. And the real sentence was in Francis, the organization win over the time. Mm-hmm. And this conclave showed that in the reality. Some people say, okay, Pope Leo was the candidate of Pope Francis. No. In my opinion, Pope Francis created the situation bringing cardinals from the periphery to the center. Mm-hmm. And that was his election. But this is a concrete case where the organization win over the time, because the time of one pontiff is a short time, 10 years, 20 years, well, some of them, a lot of years, but in 10 years or 20 years, you can't to change an structure. But if you trash in the organization, in the community, that change will be possible. And Pope Francis, in my opinion, did that when he bring cardinals from the periphery. So that is a sign that he trashed in the organization more than in his time.
Thank you. Right, we have some questions.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentations. My question is for Professor Afe. So I am really sort of intrigued by what you think a Vatican position, particularly someone like Pope Leo, sort of the meaning around sort of using the term Black Pope, African popes, and actually what that means. And I say that in part because certainly if the future of the church is in the global South and is in Africa, and we see, I guess this would have been, and I'm going to get this right, in March of 2026, the UN General Council adopted the Ghana-led resolution recognizing the transatlantic slave trade as the gravest crime against humanity, calling for member states to issue apologies, return stolen artifacts, and establish reparations frameworks, arguing that the legacy of slavery continues through systemic racism and underdevelopment. If Africa is speaking to us right now, and Africa that was devastated by the transatlantic slave trade, devastated by colonialism, what role do we see Pope Leo, who is a son of Africa, who is a descendant of both the enslaved and enslavers, whether he knew that, he didn't know that until recently, also recognizing that his journey through the U.S. church would not have been possible without his mother making a decision to pass for white, because he would have encountered sort of these white supremacist structures within the United States. But if Africa is speaking now, And that is what Africa is telling to the world, but also recognizing the Catholic Church's culpability within the transatlantic slave trade, with the church, with the doctrine of discovery, with the church being the largest corporate slaveholder in the Americas, and in the case of the United States being the largest Christian practitioner of segregation, which required his mother to pass for white to be able to navigate the Catholic spaces in places like Chicago. Where do we see this conversation going? And in particular, does the African Catholic Church, which is in itself, for the most part, a product not only of the transatlantic slave trade, but also still suffering the devastating consequences of colonialism, in which the Catholic Church is also at the forefront, even thinking about his order of Augustinians as well, who were at one time stationed at Elmina, which is the oldest of the slave castles and the first site of the first Roman Catholic Church in sub-Saharan Africa. Where is that conversation headed, in particular, as we sort of think about the meanings of the first Black Pope, in quotes, in the modern period, and where do we sort of stand? Because there is this point to say the church can say a lot, but until they respond to this crime against humanity, which was the slave trade, which was colonialism, which is very much a part of the story and the epic narrative of how we get to Pope Leo. Where is that in this conversation? Because there's no way to sort of talk about the demonization of Africa without also recognizing the role of the Catholic Church in that. And what does that mean now that we have a son of Africa who has somehow made it to the highest ranking? So I'm just curious how that fits into this conversation as we all meditate on the meanings of his lineage, his genealogy, but also his important place right now in the history of the church.
Yes. No, thank you. Very, very important questions you raised. Maybe I will respond to this in two ways. First, I think if you think about the 4 countries he visited, the most significant one that helped us to revisit the question of the transatlantic slave trade was Angola. And the visit to the shrine, Mama Muzima's shrine, I think epitomizes that. Thinking about the whole question of the Black Pope, I think I'm using, again, Africa here generically, because I think I take what the African Union did several years ago, where they identified the African diaspora as the 6th region of Africa. So when they think about Africa, it's not just Southeast, but the diaspora. And I've argued in my work, that's why any book article I'm writing now, I argue that, our understanding of Africa is incomplete without the African diaspora, but also the history of the African diaspora is incomplete without Africa. And I think Pope Leo kind of exemplifies this transatlantic, connection. So in a way that raises up new questions about what role the church played in that process. And I think usually when questions of reparation comes up, everybody is withdrawing. I was, when Princeton had the historical audit on slavery, I wrote a proposal to my president. I said, look, the whole conversation must not end here with the report that has just been brought out, but we need there should be a resilience of that conversation. So what I did was a proposal to the Board of Trustees, and I said, look, let's take this conversation forward. So I came up with the possibility of having 2 conferences, one in Liberia, and the public is so ignorant about the connection between Liberia and America today. Unfortunately, even the president, hearing the president of Liberia speak and say, oh, your English is so good, And then the second conference was in Washington, D.C. So we had these 2 conferences in the past 4 years, just to show that for us to move forward, it's important to, look at the rearview mirror. It's important to be able to move forward, to look at the past, because the past helps us to move forward. To attempt to bury the past is like scorching the snake without killing it. So I take very seriously that for the future of Christianity, the future of the Catholic Church, it's important to look back and to see how the Catholic Church was part of the problem, but also is going to be part of the solution. And when we finished this whole conversation in Princeton, I made a bold statement. I said, okay, might we even go now and interrogate history, Princeton with the Presbyterian background. Might we investigate the Presbyterian Church, how they were complicit in slavery? And people say, don't go there. Yeah, so we need to have those conversations. And I think if we look at our political climate today, to suggest that the best way America will go forward is to bury the past, I would say is just scorching the snake. And I think that has to do with the whole politicization of immigration and the criminalization of immigrants today. The way immigrants are seen. I mean, I was going through the students' presentation, and I said, look, one way to perhaps deal with the problem in the U.S. maybe is to look back at how the U.S. has characterized immigrants, which I think legally has been a criminalization process. Of course, it can be argued that, oh, well, this is a legal term to say immigrants are illegal aliens. That is annoying. What is an illegal alien when we are thinking about human dignity? So these are larger questions that are embedded. And I think I hear you where you are coming from, but I look at, when I talk about the quest for the Black Pope, it's a bigger question. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
We're going to have a question from our online audience now.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. I hope this mic is working.
Now it is, yeah.
Okay. Mary Ellen wants to go back to something you mentioned, Chris. She asks, what is the significance of the Vatican's communications office reform, and why was this restructuring considered necessary at this moment?
I would say the Vatican Communications Dicastery, as I mentioned earlier, is just it is the largest of the Vatican departments. I think it's fair to say that the reform of that is long overdue. It's a reform that Pope Francis had sort of started early on in his papacy and brought in all sorts of experts. There was a big study that was done. And then for a number of internal reasons, it was never fully embraced. And I think in large part just due to size and the fact that the Vatican is a pretty sclerotic institution, that there's still all sorts of power struggles there. And at the heart of it is just a very different mindset and a way of thinking. You know, is the Vatican an Italian institution, or is it going to be a more international institution? And should its structures look more like that of, say, the United Nations than it does something that is still very much entrenched in the Italian way of doing things? And so the internationalization of the Vatican Dicastery, in a sense, is quite political because it touches off so many very sensitive points around the Curia more broadly. And that's just,
Thanks.
yeah.
Please.
Hi, my name is Bill Murphy. Thank you very much for your presentations. I have lots of questions I could ask you, but I have to restrict myself here. So the first one has to do, I think it's self-evident to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that Leo's priorities really center in receiving the Second Vatican Council and living out Catholic social doctrine. That's in his name and his motto and his catechesis. So that seems very central. So he could, that seems easier to realize maybe in the global South than in the United States. And so I'm wondering about like the realization of that in the United States. And I wonder if one question is, because there's a lot of obstacles to that in the United States based on where we are. And a lot of it is, there's intellectual obstacles, there's institutional obstacles, but what can we do to help? Do you see a path for us, for the United States to be more of a help than a hindrance? Because we can cause a lot of trouble if the church in the United States is not really living out Catholic social doctrine, but if we're empowering tyrants and such. So it seems like it's kind of a priority for the world. And so, I mean, does Leo understand? Is that a priority for him? Does he understand it? What can we do to help? There's lots of discussion that could be had around that. But oh, I was hoping Chris would take a shot at it. Okay.
I mean,
But
I'll take a start of the question, but I think Emilce has important things, particularly through the Building Bridges initiative, because I think so much of building the bridges is one answer to this. I think in Francis's final years, particularly through the synodal process, there was one issue, almost above any other issue, that he sort of zeroed in on. And we saw this both in the October 23 and the October 24 synod sessions in Rome. The times that Francis spoke were always about, within the actual synod process, were always about seminary reform. It's like he had a bee in his bonnet, and rightfully so, about the need for seminary reform. And I think part of it is him identifying this very, very problem. He, of course, early on in his papacy used, various forms of the phrase, the scourge of clericalism, the disease of clericalism. And I think in a large part, he was very fearful of so many young priests that had largely been sort of cut off or not formed in the church's social teaching. And this was, I think, a large part of his call. That's not sort of a silver bullet, but I think that is a huge part of it for the church's social teaching to be seen. It just simply is, the magisterium. And yet the level of sort of instruction formation is lacking. We're expecting in coming weeks Leo's first encyclical, which of course will, again be his attempt to put social teaching, at the heart of his papacy. How he intends, for Francis, it was very clear, the way in which he wanted to sort of spend his time was focusing on seminaries. I don't know what Leo's strategy is at this stage, but.
If I could add a footnote, I think as one who has been just witnessing what has transpired in the U.S. In the past, couple of years, I was very impressed with, Pope Leo's, speaking to power, saying very categorically, I am not afraid of you, Trump. And I think a lot of Christian bodies and leaders today are complicit in the political mess that we have, because there's a Christian constituency that is so vocal right now. Yeah. All others are pretending to be praying. And I think there's a problem there, because the church thinks, I don't want to speak up because I don't want to be seen to be political. Hello. By being silent, you are political. And I think what his pronouncement has implications not just for the U.S., but in Africa, across Africa, because those countries he visited where you have a 93-year-old man who thinks he still has a brain to run a country, and corruption and all that, those issues. So I think it's a clarion call for me, because as an observer of the political mess in the U.S. right now, I think the church is asleep. It needs to wake up, because to simply say we don't want to be political, so we need to be quiet. Hello, you are political already, because being silent is political as well.
Thank you very much for that. Can I just insert? Chris, I don't know if you know, I've worked in seminary for like 20 years. So yeah, so there's a lot of, there's a big challenge to, dealing with that situation that has to do with the way even seminary formators over recent decades have been formed. And I don't know that there's that many places that are doing a good job on it. So the question is, what's the right way to really address that? Because you almost have to go around a lot of the seminaries. But I didn't mean to cut off.
Do you have a response to the first question? Do you want to weigh in on this? Yeah. Do you want to? You don't have to. Yeah, you don't have to.
There's an aspect of it that really relates to your ideas versus reality, which is that there's a big emphasis. You're probably very aware. There's a big emphasis on like speculative theology again, which is really looking at social matters really from a perspective of metaphysics as opposed to practice, and that infiltrates a lot of the infrastructure. But
well, in my opinion, at the moment, is how to respond the question, who is the theologian? Because in the history, theologian is who can to judge what is the truth and where is the truth. So we must to be clear who is at the moment the people who take the role of the theologian. And there we have the problem. Because you can ask to bishops, cardinals, through the three Americas, and you can listen from them that the people at the moment are not correct only to the Pope. They are doing the correction on the priests, on the bishops, and on the cardinals, what is exactly the truth, how we must to take the communion, in which position we must to put the hands when we are going to the communion, from where they take that knowledge. From the media. From the media. We have millions of influencers who are doing the catechesis to the people. So at the moment, they are the theologians because the people believe in them. So when a public person do the correction about what is the real moral, we are the problem. We have the problem because they are learning that. So this is an idea that 20 years ago, a French author, very famous about political theory, I can't remember the name now because I am old, and he said, we must identify who is the theologian, because that is the role of the theologo. So who is teaching what is exactly the true theology? We must to do focus over there, because the people believe on theologians, but to whom the people recognize that they know and they can to judge which is the truth. There we have the problem, not in the seminaries, not in the universities, in the money. Pope Francis do this. The evil enter through here, and they do exactly this. Because we have millions of influencers, because somebody put millions of dollars in that pocket. So they are the theologian at the moment. So we must to do a revision, not about the Pope, because it's a problem of all the Catholicism. It's not the church, it's not the Curia Romana, it's not the Pope, it's not the university, it's who is at the moment the authority that where we put the capacity to do discernment and to judge what is true and what is not.
This gentleman has been waiting a while to ask a question. Please.
Hello, thank you to all of you. I wanted to first say that Africa represents a huge hope, I believe, for the church and the world. As a matter of fact, before Pope Francis was elected, there were many of us who were hoping for Cardinal Sarah to get the call. And we still admire him and hope for his participation. But we also have a friend who's a priest in Nigeria. And I won't give his name because it's a dangerous place. As a matter of fact, Nigeria is the most dangerous place in the world for Catholics. Thousands have been killed, thousands have been put into slavery. And the amazing thing is the Pew Institute did a study on who goes to church where in the world. My family was from Lithuania. Today, 7% of Lithuanians go to church. Of course, my grandparents were Jews who had to flee from Lithuania and Russia because of the pogroms. So it goes on in this country and in this city, and it goes on around the world. So there's no one group that's free from discrimination and danger. But another part of the survey that the Pew Research did said that 94% of Nigerian Catholics go to church on Sunday. 94%, knowing that they could die for going to church. That's love of God and love of one another in an extraordinary way. So that kind of faith gives me hope for the church around the world. And I had actually hoped when I learned that Pope Leo was going to Africa, and the conversations he was having with Donald Trump, I was hoping that Pope Leo would go to the president of Nigeria and plead with him to work toward peace. And I was hoping that maybe even Pope Leo would go to Boko Haram and say, please stop killing our people. Please, where can we find a place of peace? He didn't do that, but it was my hope. So I think Africa is a huge hope for this country and the world. And the second part of that is I hear the term synod and synodal over and over again. And I have to admit, I read and I read and I read, and I can't see how the Pope's and Pope Francis's idea of synod is working out. Here in the Archdiocese of Chicago, Cardinal Supich is one of the most ruthless and demanding and authoritarian cardinals that we've had. I don't know, he's probably canceled more priests or as many priests as he has ordained. So can somebody tell me what the reality is about synod, both in Africa and here? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much for your question and all the comments. Just to say I'm from Nigeria, and I would like to make first a disclaimer. I will claim that, yes, majority, like you said, 94% of Catholics go to church on Sunday. Yeah, there's a truism in that. And so we have to begin to understand, what does this mean? And I think this brings us back to the question of the vitality. What is happening in church? It's not simply, it used to be theorized that people go to church in the global south because they are poor. That's not true. I was involved in a research on mega churches, where we even have looked at Catholic mega churches that are populated by rich people. So what makes rich people go to church? What are they looking for? So I think there's something there that we need to investigate, and not just think that people go to church in these places because they are poor. Of course, poverty is one of the indicators, but there's something else that is happening that needs to be captured. Let me do a little disclaimer. I'm not quite sure that Nigeria is the most dangerous country in the world. If it was, I was researching on there are at least 15 U.S. oil companies in Nigeria. If it was the most dangerous country in the world, they would have packed their bags and go. Yes, so I think it's a big question you are raising, what to do with the conflict situation there, the relationship between Christians and Muslims. And I would say that the problem is not with Islam or Christianity. I think it's the politicization. You know, I grew up in an Anglican school that was attended by Muslims. A lot of my friends are Muslims. We go during Ramadan, we go and eat ram and celebrate. During Christmas, they visit us. So in Western Nigeria, most families are still like that. Husband is Muslim, wife is Christian, daughter is Pentecostal, the other is Catholic, and they live amicably. I think the problem is the politicization, the instrumentalization of religion, and part of the problem is external too. So to be able to deal with the current security problem that we have, it's a very complex situation. I don't know any state in Nigeria where arms are being produced. No arms are produced in Nigeria. So where are the arms coming from? So it's like, buy our arms and kill yourself. We don't care. That's another part of the problem. And so it's a complex question and problem that needs multiple solutions. I just wanted to highlight that. And I think there's something to be learned from what is happening among Catholics or within Catholic institutions on the other side of the Atlantic. But most importantly, I want to revert back to the point I made that on the continent, I think it's also a clarion call to Catholic leaders, to take their destiny in their hands by also speaking to power. Part of these problems can be solved even in Nigeria without needing outsiders. If the religious leaders, again, I come back to religious entrepreneurs, I have no problem with politicians visiting churches for blessing and all that, for campaigns and all that. That's fine. But also, when they start to misbehave and they are corrupt, speak against it. So is that complacency that is part of the problem? So the leadership surrounds themselves with all kinds of people, to consolidate power. So even the conflict, we think about the economics of Boko Haram, who is sponsoring Boko Haram? If we can identify where, and I gave an example of the arms, the ammunition and all that, where are they coming from? It's not difficult to know. So why is there no intervention as far as the source of these weapons are concerned? Because if you can stop these weapons coming into the country, that is part of the solution, of course, not the only solution. So we should be careful not to say, oh, these guys are killing themselves, oh, it's all dangerous, but we can sell you arms to kill yourselves at the same time. Yeah, I think that is counterproductive.
I'm going to jump in with a question for Chris, really a two-part question that has to do with Pope Leo as an American. Have you seen his American identity manifest itself in any way in the papacy, or how do you see that? And then on the flip side of that, what does it matter for Americans? I mean, I think about Pope Francis visiting in 2015 for his first trip ever to the United States. Never has there been a pope who knows the United States as well as Pope Leo does. So those two things, could you reflect a little on each of those?
Sure. I think in the early months of his pontificate, we saw him reluctant to lean into his Americanism. The night that he was elected, he, of course, spoke in Italian, which is, I think, fitting, as Bishop of Rome, and then he spoke in Spanish, addressing his home diocese. And I think, he would often, when he was stopped in St. Peter's Square during general audiences by Americans, he would respond enthusiastically. But there wasn't anything overtly American. I think the most overtly American thing that he's done since becoming Pope happened just a few weeks ago when reporters stopped him as he was leaving Castel Gandolfo, and he weighed in about the war in Iran, and then he looked in the camera and he said, "Call your congressman." And I think it was just a very American reaction and demand that they reject violence. That's when he seemed most American to me. In terms of what his visit here will mean, I mean, and what his papacy means to Americans, I'm excited for him to receive, I forget the name of the exact award he's accepting from the Constitution Center in Philadelphia in July. He's going to give a virtual address. But I think he'll, in a sense, remind Americans of who they are and their values. And I think that is, in a sense, the great gift of having an American Pope at a time in which you see sort of increasing isolationism, a withdrawal from sort of the multilateralism that is, defined since the Second World Order. I think he'll call us back to that, and I think that's a very promising thing.
Very much for your presentation. Just a real quick question for any of you. Early in his papacy, Pope Leo has appointed men around him, his closest associates, Nigerian priest, Peruvian priest. What significance do you see that to the church, the global south, and his priorities with that area? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I think of course, it's too early to begin to make any conclusions. I think these are right steps in the right direction, but it looks to me that there's a lot more that needs to be done if we are to kind of deal with the bigger question. For instance, I was asking myself, I think, how many cardinals? 140 who makes the decision? Or
133.
133. And right now, out of the 133, I suspect there are only 14 from the continent. And there are, I think, 18 from Italy alone. That says something. That shows us there's a big road, to walk if we are to kind of deal with the bigger question. So this is like a drop in the ocean, but I think it's a right step in the right direction. And if we don't change, of course, it's difficult to change tradition. Everyone thinks, oh no, this has been the whole thing, but the demographic change. What do we do with it? If we're to, and that's why I mentioned in my paper, if we're to go by voting and referendum, it will change the composition. But there will be strong resistance to that. So while there is this, I think it's a good thing to do. Pope Francis and other popes, they've been moving towards that direction, but there needs a kind of a drastic step to address the question. How can we ensure that there's some kind of parity, looking at the global structure of the world church today? How if it happens, let's say in 20 years, or in 30 years or in 40 years, and there's the need for the next pope, and you still have the conclave, with maybe 150, and 15 are from one continent, and 18 are from one country in Europe, there's a problem there. So we hope that there will be this kind of openness, and maybe another way to put that, there's still, and I think I say this not mainly within Catholicism, within the global church, there's still cognitive pride. And we need to address that, otherwise we are just scratching the surface. So I appreciate that point you made, but I think there's a long road to walk as far as this is concerned.
We're down to just the final minutes of our panel, and I know there's one online question and one question from the audience, so I suggest we hear both questions and then ask the panelists to respond very briefly.
Okay, thank you. The question online is asking very broadly for all of you, how do you think Leo will address divisions in the church regarding the Latin Mass and Vatican Council II, since there seem to be people trying to undo Vatican II in a sense?
Okay. And then, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, it's a very short one.
Okay.
And this is for Chris. Chris, do you think that Pope Leo is coming to America, to his home country, in the near future?
Depends on what you mean by near. I think he's a young man. He's going to have plenty of time to visit the U.S. I don't think it's certainly not in the cards this year. And if I were making bets, I think he might wait a few years for a number of reasons.
All right. Thoughts on the divisions in the church? How unity, to your point, Emilce, how he might work to achieve that?
Now, the two questions is to speak about the future. I am theologian. I am not futurologist.
And I'm a historian, so I can't do it either. So,
yeah, I think the whole question of trying to encourage interreligious dialogue is one important step. But I think we have to also be careful that when it comes to dialogue, we think of it as inter and not intra. There's a greater division within the church than between the church and outside. So it seems to me that the efforts, what he is beginning to do, like especially when he criticized the war, the Anglican African primate or Archbishop, yes,
yeah.
Was one sympathizer. Mm-hmm. And I think I would say the Pope is just one individual. Even within the papacy, if he doesn't get the support of the larger hierarchy, there's not so much he'll be able to do. And I think this is just a kind of a wake-up call for leadership to be attentive to change. I think we often think that, tradition is static. This is the tradition. I think we are so blinded not to think that tradition changes. It is our gaze, our eyes that is fixed. So the World Catholicism has been changing all the time. And we have to, for the church of the future, change is important, tradition is important. And how that happens would depend not just on the Pope alone, but on the wider church, I think.
Beautifully stated. Well, the title of this panel was A Global Gift Exchange, and I think you'll agree that wonderful gifts have been given as part of this conversation. So please join me in thanking our three distinguished panelists.